Like I was a kid. I had
Yeah.
no idea. My body wasn't attuned to being physically punished and being able to hurt and be able to recover. And the first few years I was exhausted, absolutely exhausted. We did a lot of work. I had a good group of mates there. You know, we all started together. And we were in the gym as often as we could. I did an AFL traineeship, so I was hanging around with the guys. And my God, we ate. I learnt to eat food. You know, I thought I was probably a good mum. We were probably all good eaters when I was at home.
Yeah,
you learn to eat.
You would have been lifting and running,
running, everything. Yep. And you sleep so much. 13 hours is not uncommon when I was playing footy.
Is that right?
Oh,
just because you were so knackered.
You're exhausted. Your body's exhausted, and the number one thing you have to do is recover.
Yep.
And sleep and food. They were the two things that you had to have. So my first year, I was really fortunate. I played 5 games.
Yep.
You know, I got 5 games in the back half of the season, and then the next year, I broke into the team from round 1. And then that was the trajectory. And I started on a halfback flank.
Yep.
And later on that year, I went and played in the forward line for a bit.
Yep. What were those first few training sessions like? Was there a moment where you're like, wow, welcome to the AFL? You know, was the ball zipping around? Was it physical? You know, develop like men in and around the contest? Like, what was that kind of environment like for a young kid?
Yeah, they were much bigger physically than me, obviously, and much bigger than anyone I'd hung around with. But at the same time, they were bigger as in they had bigger muscles.
Yep.
I'd played senior footy since I was 15.
Right.
So I was used to men, and I'd been cleaned up so many times playing against men, and I knew that when you get cleaned up, it bloody hurts. So in that sense, I think playing senior footy was a good precursor to going into the AFL.
Right.
My running capabilities were terrible. I was reasonably fast, but I couldn't sustain it. But on top of that, in Alice Springs, there wasn't television like there is today. We had ABC, and then Imparja came in, and Imparja would play one game of footy, and it would be the match of the round.
Yep.
Now, in the early 90s, West Coast were the dominant team, with Geelong and a few others.
Yep.
But Imparja, from my memory, used to play West Coast Eagles more than anyone else.
Right.
Plus, they played in final series for 4 or 5 years.
Yep.
So going to Richmond in 1996, I knew the West Coast Eagles team. I didn't know the Richmond team.
Right.
So I genuinely introduced myself to guys that I didn't know who they were.
And like they were established.
They were still Chris Naish. I walked up to Chris Naish. I said, "Oh, hi, my name's Joel." And he shook my hand. He goes, "Oh, g'day, I'm Naishi." And I'm like, "Oh, g'day, man." You know, went over to someone else, hello, at training. But I was never overawed by it.
Right.
Because I grew up in a family who was a Richmond family.
Yep.
My brother Sean had been drafted to Richmond previously, and I'd met a number of people. Like we'd been to the club, we'd been to the MCG, we'd been to training.
I was going to ask, you know, were the Mick Moldhouses and the Neil Balms and those of that ilk around you maybe more than they would have otherwise been?
No, they weren't.
Okay.
And Wolsey wasn't a Richmond alumni.
Northey was, right?
But Northey was. So I went to training in 1995.
Yep.
And I met a few guys then, but I knew, for instance, I knew Brendan Gale. I'd met Brendan Gale because Sean played with Brendan Gale.
Right.
And that's actually probably the genesis of the reason why we're still mates, you know, because I met him when I was so young, and then we continued that legacy through the Players Association and everything else when he came back to Richmond and all that sort of stuff. So it was hard, like, training was bloody hard. I had to do extras because I was young, and they were swimming and riding and all these other things. But it was everything I needed. I needed to develop as a young man, and I reckon in my first 3 years I probably put on 8 or 10 kilos.
Right.
You know, I went from
of lean muscle probably.
I hope so, but
well, if you're going to be running that much and lifting that much, you can't, can you?
There was a group of us who were all trying to lift 100, bench press 100 kilos. We're all trying to get a bit heavier. We're all trying to just develop as quickly as we could. But I was also extremely lucky because in those first few years, we weren't going great. The first year we missed the finals. The second year they sacked the coach. I had a little bit more time to develop. And I think it was probably only till year 4 or 5 was I fit enough to genuinely run out a game of footy.
Right.
Now, these were the days when you played 100% of game
Game
time.
time.
If you're on the field, you're on the field.
Yep.
If you're on the bench, you sat there and watched. And that was
Until
my
someone got injured
experience
or-
when I first played
Yep.
in my first year. I was on the bench and I sat and watched. You were on the bench. You came off. If someone came off, it was for an injury.
Yep.
That was about it.
Yeah.